So the procedure is to complete the application, to get them in the queue or on the waiting list, to see if you can access respite services. Respite services are sometimes available during the 3 or 4 year wait, meaning a professional babysitter, someone that can assist you with your child so that you can do anything from chores, spend time with other children, go to their functions, or things that might otherwise be difficult. So that's a benefit that comes to you literally while you're waiting. And then ultimately when they're targeted, the potential of getting disability Medicaid in addition to up to, in today's dollars, about $16,500 a year worth of services. So, and you might ask, what does it take for your child to qualify? Again, developmental or intellectual disability or delay. So if you would say that your child is not at your chronological age relative to development compared to peers, that's an indicator that that you may want to consider pursuing the waiver. As you will find, as parents of children with special needs, there is always an element of running something up the flagpole and seeing if they salute. Meaning, not everything you do is going to work. Not every program, not every benefit, etc. But certainly there's benefit in trying. And I'd like to tell you that these things are black and white, but they're not. Because I'll have one family and then the next one family comes in, got turned down for something, and I'm like, really? Wow. Next family comes in, they have the benefit, and I'm like, your child qualified? Really? Do you see what I'm saying? So, we're all humans. And so that's where I encourage families to engage. And obviously I'm talking to the choir because you're here this evening, your parents that engage. But I would encourage you to explore the Family Supports Waiver. And if you do have an interest or want an application or more information, make a note in the comment section, and I'll make certain that we're faithful in following up, and we can spend more time on the waivers during our individual consultation. But that's the Family Support Waiver. Now, there is one other waiver called the CIH, or Community Integration Habilitation Waiver. The state is very stingy with that waiver because it's expensive to the state. There are some situations where that waiver can be in play, and that I would be happy to talk with you about on an individual basis. There's no waiting list for that. You can't just sign up and say, put me in the queue for that waiver, which is how things used to be. The CIH waiver is really a current evaluation situation to determine if the present situation demands that. And the state really holds that back for the most serious of situations. Now, those are the waivers, the CIH and the Family Supports Waiver. Those are the two waivers that are handled through the BEADS office, again, in Kessler and Keystone. And they handle it for Marion and all surrounding counties. So if you're contiguous county, the only county they don't handle that would be near here would be Madison. Otherwise, Hancock, Johnson, Hendricks, Hamilton, etc., all in Marion handled through that respective BEADS office. Now, if you do have a child that has significant physiological or medical issues, then in that case, there are waivers that are handled through the area agencies on aging. And the waiver that parents key in on from that community is the aged and disabled waiver. But the aged and disabled waiver has a fairly high standard or threshold for eligibility. And they're looking at the need for feeding tube, breathing apparatus, possibly non-ambulatory. In other words, where the level of care is at a skilled level. And it might otherwise be difficult for the child to stay in the home without that type of support or help. Again, these are waivers, and I wanted to spend a moment talking about it because there's kind of a lot of information swirling out there about waivers, and people are sometimes kind of questioning what the real story is. Any questions on waivers before we move on? Okay, please understand, if you're curious what they waive the requirement that the family meet the financial criteria. So if your child's targeted for a waiver, they can be on disability Medicaid, okay, despite the fact that you have a significant income and or assets. So please understand, your income or assets will not block your child's eligibility for disability Medicaid if and when they've been targeted for a Medicaid waiver. The other thing they waive is that services be provided in an institution. Through the waiver, you can actually have professionals come to your home to help you. Yes, sir?
Sure.
Okay. If there are questions, don't hesitate. Yes.
So each state has its own requirements. If a child in one state is on a waiver list, does it transfer if the family moves to another state, or does it just depend?
Well, generally, there's not reciprocation, meaning it's not a given that you're going to get a parallel level of service in moving from state to state. Now, excuse me, if you have a crisis situation, meaning, it's not going to be possible to not have help or services, then those are the kind of situations where a waiver like the CIH waiver may come into play. But what I would suggest is that government benefits and government benefits relating to Medicaid waivers are state specific, and whereas Social Security, and general Medicaid, although state administered, fairly consistent state to state, waivers are definitely an interesting breed. And for some families, depending upon the waiver their child has, that could even dictate whether they would consider moving out of state or not.
And also, that would depend on who you might appoint as a guardian.
Yes, it can.
Where they live.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Excellent point. You're absolutely correct. For those that were grandfathered, and you may have known your kids are young, but there are some that were grandfathered into the CIH waiver, and those people are really unlikely to leave Indiana. But it's now tough to get that waiver. And what's interesting, to give you an example of this, like in southern Indiana, veteran community of Louisville, years ago, we had families from Kentucky moving to Indiana because of what was called the developmental disabilities waiver or the autism waiver, okay, which were deep pocket waivers that largely they went away September 2012, but we actually had families moving across the river into Indiana in order to make their child eligible for to get on the waiting list for those great waivers. Well, after September 2012, those waivers largely went away. Some people grandfathered in, but if you didn't have it, you weren't going to get it. Now, over the last couple of years, families moving from southern Indiana to Kentucky in order to make their child eligible for what's called the Michelle P. waiver down there, named after an individual called the Michelle P. waiver, which is similar, not exactly, to the better waivers we used to have. So it's kind of interesting how people literally sell their house and move. If you ever, I've had families where they've got the waiver they want and they've refused a promotion or even changed jobs to avoid having to transfer out of state. So the waivers can be a significant moving force. Now, I will tell you, in Indiana now, with the family supports waiver, at $16,500, it may not be that earth-shattering. Do you see what I'm saying? To have that significant impact as it might have at one time. So things have changed.
And CIH stands for Community Integration.
Habilitation, right? So attempting to integrate someone, that's just the name. I'm not sure who came up with that name. It's long, so we call it CIH. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier about if you had a higher income, would you be necessarily losing the waiver, or would you still be able to have the waiver?
Okay, part of what has made the Medicaid waiver so very popular is not only the kind of explosive growth in the autism spectrum community, but also the fact that if your child is targeted for a Medicaid waiver, okay, your assets as parents, your assets and your income will not block their eligibility for waiver services or having disability Medicaid.
So your wages could go up, your income could come up, but you're on the threshold. Either you have enough or you don't.
What I'm telling you is that if you're the CEO of Lilly,
Right.
okay,
Right.
if your child is targeted for the Medicaid waiver, they can be on disability Medicaid.
You're still all right.
Right, your $10 million a year, including bonus and stock options, would not prevent your child from being
Well,
on
I'm not
disability.
worried about that.
Right,
That's
but I'm just giving you
I know.
the extreme. Right, in other
Right.
words, that's part of what they waived.
Okay.
Parents are not subject to the asset or income test for your child to be on disability Medicaid, only if they're being targeted for a Medicaid waiver. It's a
What
huge
if they're
exception.
already on it?
That's what.
That's where, because our son is on it, and they're telling me that we're going to lose it because he makes more money.
Okay. How old is your son?
8.
No. No, you should not lose it because of income or assets that you have. They are asking for annual reporting now. There's like a 2-page report that they're wanting. And they're actually asking for information that isn't salient because they can't turn you down based on those responses. But it seems at times the government wants information just because they want it. But if you make a note in the comment section, because I would like to talk with you about that situation. People do make mistakes, things happen.
It
And,
involves a business being part of
Well,
the
yeah,
business,
because
so-
right now we're trying to decide what insurance to go with, because the lady that I talked to at Medicaid or wherever said that we're gonna have to switch health insurance, and that he's gonna have to give up his Medicaid, and that makes him give up his waiver, and I
Right,
was
oh,
like,
yeah, there's a huge ripple effect. Which waiver is he on, by the way?
the,
Is it the family supports
Yes.
waiver, not the A&D?
right,
Because the other thing the state's been doing is for those that have a child on the A&D waiver, if they're not accessing skilled care nursing services, they've been forcing them off that over to the family supports waiver. But that does not appear to be the case in your situation. However, let me mention this, because some people get a little confused. What I said does apply to you as parents. It does not apply to your son. What I mean by that is they're not waiving any asset or income requirement of a son. Now, I'm assuming he's not an 8-year-old movie star, or whatever, yet. However, if your son has $2,000, okay, if he did, in a savings account, or government bonds that grandparents keep buying, or a UTMA or a custodial account, mutual fund, on and so forth, he's touched.
right.
Then he would lose it.
Yes,
Right.
right.
Okay. Not lose the 2,000 or whatever.
He has, the individual receiving services, they'll never waive that. So the child, it's generally not a good idea to accumulate assets in the name of or associated with the social security number of your child with special needs. I will tell you that now.
That's
Sooner or
good.
later, it will come back to bite you. Yes?
How about 529A?
Okay. As far as 529s, I'm sorry. For 529s, it's a bit of a unique situation. There are two types of 529s. You have your regular 529, and then you have your UTMA, or UTMA, Uniform Transfer to Minor Act 529. Regular 529s, we've not had a problem with yet. But you want to be careful if you're going to have a 529 for your child with special needs. Again, it should not cause a problem with benefits. But I do counsel families to make sure you have a successor participant on there. So, are you married?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you set up that account as an example, and you're setting it up, and he's like, do you want a successor participant? Oh yeah, I'll put my wife down. What's her social? Oh, I don't have it. And he's like, well, you can get back to me. So what happened there is you set up the 529 for your child. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay, and you're the only participant because you just didn't have to have the social, and we're going to deal with that later for your wife, right? Are you following? Now something happens to you. Now we have no participant. And that money is like a heat-seeking missile heading for your child when he turns 18. It's a problem. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because at age majority, he'll assume responsibility for that account because there is no living participant.
Sure.
So if you're going to utilize, because 529s are great in Indiana, especially with the 20% tax credit. But if you're going to do that, I do counsel parents to have a successor participant in place.
Okay.
Just to be on the safe side, so that if something happens to you, your wife moves up. Do you see what I mean? You want to have a participant there, otherwise the funds will eventually default to your child, probably at a point where you're potentially trying to get SSI for them or other issues at age 18.
They can get
Right, oh yeah, that'd be a big problem. The other thing is UTMA 529s, and that's basically where you already have assets in their name and you want to move it into a 529. And those are a little too complex to talk about in a workshop, but if any of you have anything UTMA, and you'll know it because you look at the registration, the statement where it has name, address, and so forth. At the end of the name, there would be a CUST, or for custodial, or UTMA, that type of thing. So if there are any accounts that have your child's name on it and it's UTMA or custodial, then we need to talk about that offline. But there's some steps that you probably need to consider taking in order to preserve their potential eligibility for benefits going into the future. But generally 529s are okay, generally.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The fees office told me that it was not okay. We have all been in discussion with this trustee, you're saying that's not true.
It's not. So we need to talk to who you're talking to then.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
because the child does not control the asset, and there is no point where that asset is going to become the child's unless it's a UTMA. Again, now, I'll have to look and make sure it's not a UTMA. Okay, if there's UTMA in the registration, then we've got a dog of a different color. Where did the money come from that went into it? Did it come from your account? Did you write a check from your account? Should be a UTMA. Make a note in the comment section. These are the kind of things. Okay, if it's not, it should not be a problem. Because there's no point where that automatically becomes the beneficiary. There is no age issue, etc. You control the account completely. And the
It's
child
not
has,
filed, but that's only money that would possibly be a
Yeah.
problem for us.
you know, and we can talk to the beats. I mean, we can talk, you know, the other thing is, I mean, you can always do a change of beneficiary in a 529. So worst case scenario, do you have another child? No? Well, then we need to talk. I mean, about talking to the beats office.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I mean, they're like, you just want to do it to be sure, but then it's what, you
Yeah.
know, it's quite
Yeah,
a bit
you
of money to
shouldn't-
set that up. So
Shouldn't
it's
have
like,
to.
why
So,
don't we do that for
and I call Social Security, I'll call Beats office. I mean, I eat, sleep, breathe this stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes they overreach, sometimes they ask for things they don't need. But I mean, I fax trusts in, I send stuff to them. I mean, we working with them all the
It'd
time.
be nice to do things we don't need to do.
Exactly, right. And that, in other words, part of my role is an advocate. Absolutely, yeah. Because sometimes they're just being overly, zealous, and sometimes it's just we're trying to work through it. Why?
Well,
Start asking
It
questions.
seems like all the laws keep changing, right, every year. It's
Yes,
like,
and we've, in the
well,
pace
you
of,
might want to, you
yes.
might want to be prepared.
pace
you
of
might-
change has picked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had, 8, 10 years of it was fairly calm. And starting about 2011, 2011, 2012, they started stirring the pot, and it's pretty much ever since then, especially with Medicaid waivers and so forth. In Indiana, we had more changes June 1st of this year. They aligned the approval process for SSI and Medicaid in Indiana, and actually some good things came out of that effective June 1st of this year. So at age 18 now, individuals that don't already have disability Medicaid through the waiver can get Medicaid at the same time when they turn age 18 as they get SSI, and that's new. Prior to that, in Indiana, you pretty much had to be 21 or get out of high school to be receiving Medicaid. So there are lots of changes, though. You're absolutely right.
Just that question, Paul, if the check does not use the 60,000 Medicaid from the school Medicaid waiver, does it get forward to next year, or you just?
No, you have an annual budget, and you work with a caseworker. Once they get targeted, then you get with the BEADS office, they do a reevaluation to determine appropriateness for services. Once the BEADS office has approved them, then you get assigned, you got to pick a caseworker, there are 4 to choose from. You get referred to the FSSA office for your respective county for the Medicaid application process. And then you've got to make sure the BEADS office has released you. Too many people trying to jump ahead for Medicaid. The BEADS office has to document the file for eligibility for the waiver. Otherwise, you're not going to get the income and asset requirements waived, and so forth. So there's a very careful process, and I've coached families through that. Okay. All right. So assets are an issue. Now, I mentioned earlier here. Not a good idea to accumulate assets. If you've already got accounts, we can talk about that in the name of your kids with special needs. But yeah, usually not a good idea. But this gets a little more tricky when something happens to you. Because we mentioned earlier that without some careful planning, the state's going to drive assets to the kids. And so what happens in some situations is something happens to a mom or a dad, or occasionally even a grandparent, and they thought it'd be really cool to sprinkle the proceeds from the sale of their home among all the living grandkids. And, and here comes money for your child. And this isn't limited to the wealthy, because it only takes $2,000 for your child to be swept off of the Medicaid waiver that you had so much angst over, Medicaid, and even potentially SSI. So this is a real issue. Traditionally, when parents learned about this, they felt they had no alternative but to leave the child with special needs nothing. They just cut them out. Everything. Leave things to the siblings, and in essence morally obligate their brother or sisters or brothers to do the right thing for their sibling with special needs. And 40 years ago it worked some of the time. These days it don't work so good. I mean, the young generation isn't as others focused, shall we say, at times, as might have been the case in the past. And so parents, understandably, are uncomfortable, leaving everything to everything for Susie with Bobby, and then Bobby's going to take care of Susie, and it's like, don't know about that. So, fortunately, a lot of lobbying before Congress, and about the same time the Medicaid waivers were coming about, Special Needs Trust came about. And Special Needs Trust is a very special opportunity for parents like you to actually create a special bucket for your child with special needs, and to make sure anything and everything that's intended for them goes to that bucket. So what happens is you're creating an identity to hold the assets or resources you want to be there for your child with special needs. And those assets and resources can help provide for and take care of your child with special needs, preserve their quality of life, enhance their standard of living, but without being considered an asset or resource in calculating your eligibility for Medicaid, for waivers, for Social Security, other benefits and supports. So it's off the radar screen. And it's powerful. It's powerful. Because seriously, outside of that, if the slightest potential exists that they are either going to need or going to have, going to be helped by government benefits at some point in their life, even if it's off and on based on how well they're doing, whether they're maintaining employment or not, then the assets and resources are going to be a recurring problem. And what you don't want to do is you don't want your estate plan to be structured in such a way that the assets or resources that you would hope would preserve their quality of life instead ends up paying for care that the government might have covered if they didn't have that money. You see what I'm saying? You know, and then the government will only help again when the money's all gone. Of course, once the money's all gone, then their quality of life going forward may be tied to what the government's willing, you know, to give them. Not good plan. But if you create a special needs trust, so as an example in my family, I've got Liz, Emily, and Matthew. So we got 3 kids. We love them all. So each gets a third when something happens to my wife and I via trust that we have established. And in the case of Matthew's third, it goes to a special needs trust. And we do that for several reasons. And my son is high functioning. This planning is not limited to children that have profound disabilities at all. This is anything from children that have profound disabilities all the way to those that are very high functioning, where the potential exists that they may go to college, get married, have a career, children, and do everything that you're doing. But life is going to be a bumpy ride. And when I say life is going to be a bumpy ride, I'm talking about the social issues, the social interactions, the potential that they will have periods of unemployment, they will be underemployed, undercompensated, that they'll have troubled relationships, you know, and I worry about this for my own son. I love him to death. I know who he is, and he's got a great heart, and I think he's pretty good company most of the time. Honestly. Okay. But you know, I got to be honest and tell you, I'm concerned he gets married. Somewhere down the road, you know, she wakes us up one day and says, you know, I hate to break your heart, but I can't take this. I can't do this. And if I'm not there, I don't want what legacy or resources I've left for him to be lost. Does that make sense? At the same time, frequently our kids with special needs are vulnerable. They seek to be accepted by their peers. And if somebody shows the sign of friendship, oh my gosh, it just lights up their day. Everybody know what I'm saying? Now, as kids, it's not that big a deal. In the adult world, you wonder what someone's motives are. And again, if I'm not there, do I want resources that I want to help preserve his quality of life to be spent on trying to buy friends? Is this making sense at all? Yeah. So, you know, so I have concerns. I want to protect him because I love him, because he's a great guy. And so a special needs trust helps protect assets and resources to see that his quality of life is maintained, that you know, that things are the way that I would intend for him. It's powerful. And then when you layer onto that the potential for government benefits, again, what's in a properly established special needs trust will not block eligibility for benefits. So it's possible for a trust to have $1 million in it, and for the child to be on Medicaid, disability Medicaid, Medicaid waiver, Social Security, different supports and benefits. At the same time, please understand, planning is not designed to inhibit their growth or reaching for the stars. In a way, the planning that we do is designed to make sure the safety net travels right up there with them. Because the alternative would be to reach for nothing. We don't want that. That's why your kid's here. Because you want them to be everything that God intended them to be, everything that they could possibly accomplish and do, and you want to make that possible for them. But in the process, there are risks. You know, not everything works. You try, you know, you get knocked down, you get up, you try again. The idea of the trust is to make sure there's always resources there to pick them up, dust them off, polish them up, and relaunch them. in life's journey. So it really is powerful. Yes.
Question for you on that. But if you have a special needs trust that doesn't, my concern is, like, we don't know what grandparents or great-grandparents or, great aunts and uncles could be leaving to, like you said, kind of sprinkling around. So if you have a special needs trust, it still is only protecting what you would be leaving your children. Like, is there any way to protect them other than just sitting down with your family and basically saying, don't leave things to my child? I mean, I'm concerned that there are like things that I don't know about other family members' estate planning.
Yeah. Okay. The question is, it sounds like this provides an opportunity for us as parents to set up things in such a way that what we leave them will not cause a problem. What about others that may potentially have an interest in helping them as well? And the answer is, it depends upon how you plan.
Okay.
And there's been an evolution in the planning process really over the last 15 to 20 years. Years ago, it was very common for a special needs trust to be an article in one's will. It basically said in the will, if I die, this person's the executor, this person gets the kids, and if my spouse predeceases me, then it's divided up among the children with regards to such and such child, see Article X. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. And then those series of paragraphs in the will would talk about establishing a special needs trust. Okay, is this making sense? Okay. That worked great for the parents' assets. But the problem was for anyone else, they couldn't participate because the parents being alive was a problem. They were in the way. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
Because their will would not see the light of day until they died.
Right.
So part of this evolution was to actually pull the special needs trust out of the will. So as opposed to the will, as opposed to the trust being what's called a testamentary trust, meaning a trust established out of your last will and testament, the special needs trust in almost all the planning we do now is a standalone trust.
Okay.
And by being standalone, it is standing there waiting for money to show up from anyone, friends, relatives, anyone that's interested in helping. And it can remain dry or unfunded for years, and as soon as anyone is ready to write a check or to help out, then we can get a tax ID number for the trust, open an account, and all deposits are welcome.
Okay.
And so we do that often. In fact, that's part of the assets under management that are growing is as a result of having these standalone trusts, and grandparents or other family members are starting to make deposits. Some grandparents are wanting to do something education for the kids, and they're like, well, we're doing 529s for Bobby and Susie. If that's not going to be the case here, is there something we could do? Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
And so the special needs trust becomes the preferred depository for funds or things that family members want to do. And typically by being standalone, knowing that it can function while the parents are here, then the parents are the trustees while they're living. So the parents, in essence, are in charge of what's gifted to the trust, which means it makes resources available to you to assist with your son's or daughter's care or help. Very powerful. Yes?
And so the person who is leaving or gifting in their will something to the child, do they have to know the special needs trust is there? Or if they just have the child's name in their will, it automatically goes to the trust? It's like
Okay.
established by the parents.
All right, the question is for that family member that wants to leave something to them or give something to them, how do they do it? Step 6 in our process is where I actually draft a letter for distribution to any and every interested party that answers all those questions. Okay? Now, the reason for the letter is because it won't work to designate the child. The trust has to be designated. And that's because this type of special needs trust is called a third-party special needs trust. It's designed for anybody's money except for the individual with special needs. Meaning their own money is not designed to receive their own money. And if they're indicated in the will, do you see what I'm saying? It's their money. Okay? So the special needs trust is not designed to be a savings account for the disabled or the special need individual's money. Okay? It's for everyone else to help them really not them helping themselves. Am I making sense? Okay? And so if, I had a situation just recently where about an 18, 19-year-old young lady was designated as a partial beneficiary of someone's IRA. Well, this wasn't even a family member. It just floored them. They were surprised. It was a close family friend, never had children, so she didn't have children to leave it to. So she had a couple of charities and, you know, mixture of things. I think there were 4 beneficiaries, a couple of charities and a couple of people that time. So the family called me, and they were all excited because, you know, they learned that their daughter with special needs had been designated as a beneficiary, and from what they could tell, her share would be $60-some-odd thousand. There's about a $250,000 IRA going 4 ways, if everybody follows what I'm saying. Okay. And they were so excited because they had set up a special needs trust for her. So they said, you know, great news, we got money coming for such and such. Boy, we're sure glad we set up that trust for her. And I said, wow, I said, that is great. I said, so the trust was designated, right? Well, no, she was designated, but we'll put it in the trust.
But can you turn it down?
No.
You can't turn it down? So did that put her waiver if she was on
Well,
waiver
so
and
more planning is required after the fact. That's what you call the cows out of the barn planning, okay? And this is where it's really powerful to do early planning like we're talking now, because if you plan now, you've got the best options on the table.
How often does Medicaid ask you about the assets?
Well, typically, in the standard situation like we're looking at here, there would be annual reporting.
So you just, do they send you a letter that they're, and then
Right,
you're just
yeah, there's a
required to
2-page
respond or
report.
whatever?
What I've seen most recently is a 2-page report, and they're asking for information. Not all the information they're asking for actually would affect eligibility for benefits, but government has their forms. So, you know, so you dutifully fill it out and submit it, and then also sometimes they want a copy of the trust, so that's where sometimes I'm faxing trust to Medicaid offices,
And
etc.
then if there's a problem, they respond back, or if they just cut, I mean,
That's also where it's really important to work with people that eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, because there are people out there that are trying to help, but they don't, their depth of knowledge is inadequate, and it can cause problems, because the government's looking at these, you know, they have their people to look at them, they want to make sure that I's are dotted and T's are crossed, that things are done properly. And mistakes are made in a lot of places. I had someone in my office Saturday who had a set of documents prepared by a very large law firm in town, you know, one that you would immediately recognize, and you'd think, oh, that, you know, has to walk on water, and, you know, in reviewing it, I found a couple of issues with it. We're going to revisit that. So it's really important, you know, to work. It's a specialty area, it's complicated, but when it's done correct, it's a huge blessing. Okay. I'm not going to spend much time on guardianship because your kids are much younger, it seems, but age 18 in the state of Indiana. And guardianship is something that is probably most often used with moderate disabilities and special needs. And that's because if a child is high enough functioning to where they're in harm's way, please understand at age 18, they can do everything you can do legally. So they can shop on the internet, they can do things on the computer, they can decide they're not going to take their meds, they're not going to the doctors, they're going to quit school, they're going to move out from home. And you may think that, you know, money will control the purse strings, but please understand, even at age 18, if you apply for SSI for them, you're the payee only because they choose. So if they decide to go somewhere, they can take their Social Security money with them. And I've seen some really tough situations, especially situations where maybe their maturity level is not at their chronological age, and they can be influenced by others, etc. So I just want to plant the seed in your mind as your child with special needs reaches the age of 18 to thoughtfully look at the guardianship area and determine, you know, how you want to respond. In the state of Indiana, guardianship is not difficult. It's a legal proceeding. You go to the county courthouse at an appointed hearing time. The judge sees it. There's no jury. It's usually quick and done. But again, once they're 18, and it's not appropriate in every situation, but you lose control. And with privacy laws in place, et cetera, I mean, you just no longer have access to medical records. You know, the doctor technically can't talk to you. All these things, it all operates off of your child authorizing or approving things. You'll even have trouble talking to your health insurance about them, even if it's your plan through your employer. It's all really, it gets quite complicated once they're age 18. If you're dealing with government agencies, that only takes it to another level. Because, you know, Medicaid's going to say, who are you? I'm the mom or I'm the dad, and it's going to be like, and so this type of thing. So I just want to plant the seed so that it doesn't pass you by, but you thoughtfully take a look at this issue when they turn 18. Okay, we touched on this briefly, but identifying a care provider, we help families build what's called a letter of intent, which is a caregiver's guide. And that's a guide to your child. And that's how to get them up in the morning. That's how to get them to bed at night. All the food issues, the doctors, the therapists, the things you've done that work, things you can have at the latest neuropsych evaluation, their immunization records, their IEP, the insurance information, the support group you go to, all the stuff, you know. And it's huge. And we have a template to help, fortunately, because you sit down with a legal pad and, you know, your circuit's got to blow. But it's fill in the blank, and we also have it online, so you can make it fillable, save it and edit it and update it as information changes, etc. That it's so helpful to family members that you're looking to step up if something happens to you. Questions on the letter of intent?
I just had a question about the disability, the Social Security. How does that factor in with the 2,000?
Okay, all right, the 2,000. Okay, the benefits that you will primarily, early in their life, you'll be looking at the Medicaid waiver, and with that, of course, disability Medicaid. So you have the $2,000 resource limit there. As far as SSI is concerned, supplemental security income, it's a monthly income stipend. It's both federal and state income tax free. And prior to the age of 18, they would only qualify based on family finances. Once they're 18, it's based on their finances, not family finances. And so you can have an 18-year-old living at home, still going to school, drawing monthly SSI to assist them with their food and shelter expense. And age 18 is the government, that's the government age, and they're an adult. So the government feels like if they are unable,
It's not based on parents' income, right?
Right, right. Yeah. Pretty much it's not, okay?
Always an exception.
Well, yeah, always with government, but with SSI, so you, in today's dollars, you can get $721 a month, is what I'm saying. And if you're the one providing the food and shelter, then that money ends up coming to you, because the government, in essence, is paying you to provide food and shelter for this adult person, because due to their special needs or disability, they are unable to maintain gainful activity by which to sustain or support themselves, even if you don't want them to or don't plan for them to. They'll make that determination, and the income benefit could start at age 18. Now, this can really be helpful for a couple of reasons. Number one, that income may come in at a time when you have other kids in college. I mean, you may be really trying to stretch the dollar. You know, in addition to that, it may be to that point you've had no way to fund the trust, meaning we earn it, we spend it. You know, we do well to just keep the credit cards from exploding and so forth. So for some families, when the SSI starts coming in, if they're living at home, it's like an extra source of income. And as parents are paid to provide the food and shelter, there's nothing to prevent the parents from taking that money, which is now the parents' money, and putting it into their trust. They can start accumulating money in the trust for the future security of their child with a disability, and in essence, in a roundabout way, the government's funding the trust. Roundabout way is key.
But it does count toward the $2,000 if you're not putting it in the
Okay.
trust, right?
Okay. 2,000 is the asset threshold, period. So they're going to count everything that's either cash or can be converted to cash toward the 2,000. And so if a child has $2,001 and you go down to the SSI office when they're 18 to apply for SSI, they'll be denied.
Okay.
In addition to that, when SSI starts depositing money into the special account that's been set up, if you don't make withdrawals from that account to cover their food and shelter
Oh,
expense,
okay, it'll be, okay.
right?
So you wouldn't be able to accumulate that anyway? I
Well,
mean,
you can't accumulate it in their name, right,
Okay.
or with their social security number. So that's where it's so key that it goes from being their money to being your money, because you're the provider of the food and
Gotcha,
shelter.
okay.
Once it's your money, totally up to you what you want to do with it.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Great question. Okay, all right, so letter of intent, really cool. Okay, I'm frequently asked, what can you put in a special needs trust? And the answer is whatever you have. Whatever you have. So if you own property, rental properties, if you've got an LLC, if you've got a farming operation, you name it, it can be put into a special needs trust. We're creative in doing this, but yeah, so like I said, so if you got 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, just you divide up everything just so the share for the child with special needs goes into the trust, and we can get just about anything into a special needs trust. Life insurance can be a very helpful tool in funding a trust. For many of us, that's where the biggest amount of dollars are going to be when we die, is the life insurance benefit that's generated. So via a beneficiary designation, you can have a share of or all of life insurance proceeds go to a special needs trust. And that can really be powerful. Also, for many of us, we may struggle to try to, like I was mentioning before, save or accumulate money in the trust. So life insurance can create the funds at our death to fund the trust that we might have otherwise struggled to try to save while we were here. And you don't want to leave the other kids out. You want to provide for the most vulnerable and the one that needs the most help, but you don't want to leave the others out, because you're going to be counting on them to be an advocate for them when you're gone. So you love them all, got to provide for all of them. The beneficiary designation is huge. Unfortunately, if your child with special needs is listed as a beneficiary, you've got an issue. And that's because the financial institution is not going to withhold the funds from them because it's going to cost them Medicaid. When checks are cut, they're going to be cut. And when your child reaches the $2,000 mark, they're toast. And so the beneficiary issue is huge. What's interesting is many of us today aren't even sure who our beneficiaries are. If one has had a remarriage, do you have the current spouse listed, or is there a beneficiary at all? Or maybe during a period of divorce, you listed the kids, now you've remarried. Was that updated to reflect a new spouse? Do you have all the kids on there? Or we have 2, but we've had 1 more or 2 more, and we're not sure we've updated it. And unfortunately, these things are not self-updating. And again, the financial institution is not going to be concerned with the fact that you have 4 kids, but only 2 are listed. They're going to pay the 2. Everybody see what I'm saying? Okay. There's not where it's like a smartphone where it figures it out on your own. These beneficiaries are not smart. They're going to stick with what it was you put down, and that's what the institution's going to do. And so this is a huge issue because a lot of these are out of date, and a lot of accounts don't even have beneficiaries on them. Part of that's because of the IT and systems and this type of thing. I mean, you'd be surprised. I sit down with people, work for a major corporation, and we pull up their beneficiary, and it's missing. Or the spouse is there, but the kids aren't on it all, and the person's like, I know I put them down, and they very well may have. But sometimes with systems integration and new systems and this type of stuff, information gets lost or dropped. Bank IRAs are bad for that. How many times can you count how many banks have taken over other banks or savings and loans or this type of thing? And records are largely on paper. Don't hold your breath. They get lost sometimes. So there are a lot of bank IRAs without beneficiary designations on them. So it's just stuff that I see because I'm in the middle of this all the time. And so we're very anal about helping families make sure all these beneficiaries are up to date and that we've got everything going where it needs to go when something happens, and getting the trust language in there, etc. So we take a very hands-on approach with that. For 2-parent situations, there is a type of life insurance that you maybe have never heard of. It's called survivorship life, and it actually insures 2 people instead of 1. So this is not life insurance to provide for a surviving spouse at the death of a husband or wife. This actually insures both parents, and it pays a benefit on the death of the second. So as an example, my wife and I, she's Alice. So in the case of Alice and I, if something happens to one of us, this policy would continue on. And then when the second one of us dies, it could deliver a trust funding benefit to Matthew's Trust. Does everybody follow what I'm saying? The cool thing about this is it's not tied to an employer. Change jobs, you still have it. It's not tied to being working years versus retired. You carry it on into retirement. It's also not something that, like in 10 years it's done, or 20 years it's done, or this type of thing. This thing can stick with you until you die, even if that's at the age of 93. So it is a beautiful way to permanently solve the issue of making sure there are funds in the trust when the parents are gone. Because what I hear a lot is I don't want Bobby to be a burden to the siblings. I want them to pursue their dreams, etc. And I get that, and I see that in my own situation. Because in some ways, life has been just a little different for them, or a lot different for them as a result of the sibling with special needs. And you want them to be free to, to pursue their dreams. At a minimum, though you want them involved, you don't want it to be a financial burden to them. And so this really can be huge, because how much money are we going to leave when we die, for sure? I mean, how much of our own resources are we going to use before we're gone? You follow what I'm saying? So you may be sitting there thinking, oh, I've got a big 401k, it's fine. You're never going to retire and use that money? Or how much is it going to cost for your care before you exit the picture? I mean, how many of us can literally sit there and say, when I die, at age 89, XYZ is going to be left? Do you see what I'm saying? And we can take a snapshot today, kind of tabulate what you have in retirement, life insurance, et cetera, and say this would be the figure. But none of us are planning to die today. The point I'm making is especially with the nature of being on the spectrum, there's nothing to say that our kids won't live to be 95 or 100. And they can have a significant lifespan beyond us.